Let me get started because, well, good morning. Welcome to the ICT Educator webinar series. I'm Steve Wright and the statewide director of the ICT sector team of the Workforce and Economic Development Department of the California Community College System, which is a mouthful at a cocktail party. These webinars are brought to you by our entire sector team, and they're produced by Nicole Sherman. And our guest speakers volunteer their time for the sake of our students' success. We appreciate them very much. Our ICT educator, our sector webinar library now includes, what is the magic number? 54 relevant and helpful webinars for community college faculty and students. As you know, they're all recorded, transcripted, the slides are there, the links. So those of you who ask the question later, and we'll be happy to respond, yes, today is going to be recorded, and yes, there will be a transcript, and yes, you will have the slides. Coming up in the next couple of weeks, we have some exciting webinars. Eon Reality is going to be back. The AR, artificial VR, is now considered XR, and it's all combined, and it's a wonderful educational technology. Then we're going to talk to Microsoft, the various portals for students, and then after that we're going to have our NetLab meeting, and I believe we're also going to have VMware and Palo Alto Networks participating in that as well. Should be exciting. Today we're going to hear from James Stanger of CompTIA. And by the way, CompTIA, as far as I know, originated the concept of certified computer technicians out of the necessity of new computers coming out and breaking down, no one knowing how to fix them. And they created a nonprofit to meet business needs, and it's just a wonderful organization. The CompTIA Certs A+ and S+ consistently pop up in the top 5 certifications requested when we do a burning glass search for labor skills needed. And today we're going to hear from James. I'm going to tell you right now, James is a fast talker. Okay, turn off everything else, go to full screen mode, sit back and listen, don't fight it. You don't have to worry about notes because everything's being recorded. And James, it's up to you. You got it now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure, everyone, to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So please let me know, folks, via the chat window that when you can see the screen here. Let me see if I'm actually, yeah, I should be sharing that. Let me know. You see it. Very good. Thanks, Trevor. And you know, I see some great locations. I used to live in Southern California. I see you're from San Bernardino. That's where I lived, actually. And Saddleback, I remember going to visit Saddleback College before, back when I was teaching at UC Riverside, doing a lot of teaching there. San Diego City College, I remember presenting there. So it's great to be, it's kind of old home week, I guess. For me, I've never been to Merced College before. I've never been to Lone Star College in Texas either, but nevertheless, I'm James Stanger. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist at CompTIA. And let's talk about some lifelong learning resources. First part of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about some research that that we've been doing at CompTIA about the state of the workforce, some of the trends and things, not only about security, but you know, tech support, cloud computing, things like that. Again, I'm James. These pictures that you've been seeing here are places where I've actually visited. That there, I don't know if anybody, is it Jane Eyre I'm thinking of, or is it, no, Sense and Sensibility, where you see, is it Keira Knightley standing on the edge of the mountain and the wind is blowing in her hair and all that stuff? That's right below where she was standing. I got a chance to walk there a couple of years ago. So today I'm going to take you on a learning pathway, and we're going to talk not only about CompTIA here, but about some CompTIA trends that we've been seeing at CompTIA. For those of you who don't know who CompTIA is, and thanks so much for the excellent outline, Stephen. We're a not-for-profit trade industry association. We have members that are individuals. We have members that are companies. Some of these companies are small value-added resellers that are just down the road from you, probably just a few miles, all the way to very large companies such as Ricoh, Dell, Apple, etc. We do a lot of certifications and education training, but a tremendous amount of work in the public sector with our members, and we work with them on a daily basis. Our Creating IT Futures Foundation focuses on philanthropy, working with less represented folks. And we also do a lot of course, research and work with media and industry partners. So let's talk about some context here, some trends in IT, and then lifelong learning resources. Steve wanted me to hit that. So first, some context, okay? You probably can see from my background here, that's Kilmartin, Scotland. Those are standing stones there. If you can't see my background, you can see the screenshot here. Those are standing stones that have been up probably for, I don't want to exaggerate too much, but I would say about 5,000 years. And this is a valley where tons of these stones have existed. And I want to kind of talk about not necessarily a history lesson, but kind of this world of technology that we've all been living in for thousands of years. The technology changes, a lot of the drives kind of stay the same. By drives, in other words, the human interest in commerce, a human interest in staying in touch. Today, we live in what some folks will call, it's a tech term, it's a kind of a buzz phrase, ambient computing. And this is basically where all of the information that we generate from our wearables, from our mobile phones, of course, but our IoT devices becomes context aware. And that works because basically all that information that we give off as we walk down a street or walk down a path, it basically gets processed, gets sent up into the cloud, let's say. Artificial intelligence, machine learning processes it. And the idea is that basically we have an ambient computing world where how should I put this? Where the information that we create moves from environment to environment and context to context, and people can market to this. People can use information very well. We're talking smart cities and things like that. And it involves, yeah, the idea of geofencing, simply the idea that you can create a fence around a person, around a neighborhood, around an area, and start to grab information about it. So all those things, whether it be a smart light bulb, right? Now light bulbs have IP addresses and many computers in them. So you turn your lights on, now you can control them remotely, but also information from those gets processed. Okay, your smartphones, etc. Well, what does that have to do with standing stones that are found in Scotland or around the world? Well, that was their way of geofencing. That was their way of gathering people together. Stephen and I were talking just earlier about how the idea, some people say, well, those were religious monuments, weren't they? Or burial monuments. Some people feel that they were commerce monuments. Basically, people could come in and gather together around them. Could be a combination of all of those things. I'm not sure that they distinguished between the idea of commerce, religion, etc. So the idea, folks, is that in today's world, we need people who don't just are consumers of IT, but know how to produce today's solutions. I've shown you this here because this is a geofence. I'm meaning to show a geofence around this because one day while I was walking here in Scotland amongst these, prehistoric, Neolithic things, I actually had somebody market to me saying, hey, now that you're in Kilmartin, Scotland, why don't you come on over here and, go to this nice tea room or whatever like that. And I thought it was just a fun little, wow, look, there's a combination of the postmodern IT world, the ambient computing world, ambient meaning it's in the air, right? And so our identities basically get processed and put into the air. I thought it was just interesting to be in a modern and a postmodern environment altogether. This is a little map here of a place called Hadrian's Wall, which the Romans built around between 100 and 400 AD. That's Hadrian's Wall there, that picture. And I had the same thing happen there where I got geofenced, right? Because they took a look at all the IP addresses I was using. And as I was walking down these beautiful places, right? There's my kid there standing, what is that? That's Sycamore Gap there on Hadrian's Wall. We found ourselves once again marketed to because there are these generations of industrial revolution that we have been living in over the long while. First revolution, steam power, boats, right? That with steam added to them, trains. Okay, second revolution, mass production and the car. That's my old Land Cruiser that I keep working on there. The third revolution, of course, was the information age. That's me doing some packet capturing. Fourth revolution, that's that ambient computing world where you kind of combine IoT with machine learning. And so the idea, folks, is that we need workers who can work in this fourth industrial revolution to create instant trust, who understand the different forms of disintermediation, what a word, who understand what it means to eliminate the middle person, as it were, to automate things. So we've come a long ways a long ways from this guy here, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who basically gave us railroads, gave us time, gave us some of the inventions that, including the first ship that was able to lay the transcontinental telegraph. He did some pretty interesting stuff that basically gave us the modern world. Um, our IT workers today are living in that world. This is my dad. He's 92 years old now. And this is him standing in front of an old dictaphone machine. This is how you captured voice back in the day. You didn't use the mobile phone, right? Like, well, you can't see the mobile. There we go. Didn't use you don't use mobile phones back then. You actually captured voice that way. And that's how it was done. One of those machines there with the horn on it, you talked into it. The other one, you could listen to it. You took that wax roll that you recorded onto and listened to it. And then that greenish kind of box there is where you erased it, right? So there's your voice capture system. Things have changed a lot since then. So let's talk about some of those trends and what it means to support today's ambient computing world. Now, if you want to stop and ask me a question, I'm taking a look at the chat window here. So please go ahead and ask me any questions on the chat window. I'll keep an eye on it. So first of all, strategic IT. Back in the day, the whole idea was, well, the important people, the business folks, the managers, they all get together and make a decision and then call in IT eventually to say, well, can you make this happen? That's the traditional viewpoint, okay, driven by business units, and then IT supports it. More and more, we're seeing successful companies take what I would consider a privileged or a better viewpoint, a modern viewpoint where strategic IT, where you bring in IT workers and they are at the creative table from the very beginning. Not saying it always has to be that way, but we're saying that, and there's the URL there for the research, where the whole idea is that strategic IT involves where IT works alongside in business with business units. In other words, the IT department and the coders aren't down in the basement where they belong. They're actually everywhere. And so we need IT workers who can think strategically and work with business leaders. The other thing I thought that would be interesting is to provide some context for what I'm talking about with this ambient computing thing and this fourth industrial revolution idea, or this idea that we need workers to understand a postmodern environment. Is this the pillars of IT? We did some research over the last few years, and we noticed that these four pillars I think are kind of interesting. One, development, coding. I think it's useful as we talk about these things, that people still understand that although obviously coding is a big deal. My first kid works for AWS. He's a user interface designer there. So he codes all day long, but that's not the only thing in IT. Infrastructure, meaning cloud, data centers, service desk, networking, all that fun stuff. Security we see as a separate pillar because it involves management, as I'll explain, governance, but also the fun techie stuff too, at least what I consider fun. Governance is fun too. And then data, the idea of business intelligence, not just databases, that's part of it, but business intelligence. So these four pillars are very important to talk about and provide some context. And I think that sometimes that 50,000 foot view can either be overgeneralized or not even talked about at all. I think it's nice to be able to fit these things into the pillars. So I thought I would start with that. Let's talk about some CompTIA research and careers that we've been seeing. That there is a picture I took. I was standing on top of Mount Fuji. That was quite the walk. I made it, but boy, oh boy, it was a tough one. And that's sunrise up there on Mount Fuji. Well, what kind of outlook do we have at CompTIA? Well, first of all, you can read it. You can Google this. We're going to give you a copy of the slides, so happy to do that. But the industry outlook for 2021, this is post-COVID. Basically, the things that we came up with are there's kind of no normal IT out there. Things are so unique. People are moving to the cloud, not 100%. We're in a very hybrid world, but cloud is very important. Tech pros need to talk business, as I mentioned before. The concept of zero trust is very important and how to implement that from a security perspective, but also from a networking perspective. Regulation, governance is very important, and diversity. So you can check that out. And if you're interested in looking at trends, we've been doing these outlooks for years. So you can look back on 2020 and 2019 to see what those trends have been looking like. Late in 2020, it's only March right now, of 2021, but we did a state of cybersecurity talking about the importance of how that has morphed, how that has changed. And so there's research there. I just want to give you very quickly some of these resources so you can go out and grab them. If you've never heard of cyber states before, totally different website, totally different resource. It's the idea that you can take a look at the state of California, for example. I'll focus on that. And you can drill down into whatever region or area you want to talk about. You want to find out what's happening in Wairika or Eureka or San Bernardino or Thousand Oaks. You can drill down using cyber states. So I thought I thought it would be really good for you to understand about the nature of the jobs that are there, not just security jobs, but all of IT. And you can drill down and do, oh boy, that went fast. You can drill down and do some pretty interesting stuff. With this interactive map, you can take a look not only at various states, but various cities, metro areas, and find out exactly what kinds of factors are involved here. We could talk about in terms of diversity with gender ratios, racial outlook, taking a look at that. We can take a look at the economic impact of IT jobs in various regions and things like that. So that's cyber states that I thought I would tell you about. There's another website called CyberSeek that focuses on security and basically says, here are the job openings. We work with Burning Glass on this, with NIST, and of course CompTIA and research. And you can take a look at the open jobs, the salaries, et cetera, involved. So I thought I would bring that up as well. CyberSeek. It's a good resource. If you want to show students real-time data about salaries. This is not just somebody going, well, we asked a couple of people what it was like in Manhattan to get a computer support job. And then we say, well, in Manhattan, you pay somebody $50,000 a year for support. Well, that's very different than somebody working in Louisiana or somebody working in San Diego, let's say. We have a real-time salary calculator where you can take a look at various job roles and regions and metro areas. So I thought that would be kind of fun. So I wanted to give you some of these things having to do with trends and things that we've been seeing. One of the things that we found at CompTIA is IT is very important because it's a foundational service. And let's see, oh, by the way, that is me walking in, let's see, that one picture, that's me walking. That's the first Monroe I ever climbed. M-U-N-R-O, I think is how they spelled. There was a guy named Monroe in Scotland who said any mountain over 3,000 feet is called a Monroe. And that was my first one. Ben Narnane, I think it was called. All right. Let's talk about why IT is so important. We basically, if possession, you've heard this concept or this truism, this cliche, if possession is 9/10 of the law, then IT departments, we possess the data. You realize that, right? Even though it's encrypted and I can't view Steven's data as it's stored or whatever, I still possess the systems, whether they be in the cloud, the data centers, or whatever, that own the intellectual property, the personally identifiable information. My point being, we need IT workers who don't just source something out of the cloud or do server administration with Windows or Linux systems. We need people who understand the importance of information and data. We need workers who can basically understand the connections between the concepts of privacy, information privacy, protecting information, and cybersecurity, to focus on various laws, whether it be CCPA and its successors, or if you do business with the UK, with the European Union, GDPR, all of the standards that are out there. We need people who not just are information systems professionals, but who are information curators and information custodians, because we're guardians of identity as IT workers. I think that's what's at stake. And I don't think that message is clearly stated enough, that we don't just protect systems. I remember 20, 30 years ago when I started in all this, oh yeah, I'm a systems, I work with systems, IS, right? And then after a while, it was like, well, we work more with data, which is true. And we work with information, which is, process data. But more and more, it's modern identities. We protect them. That there is a rock called Boxing Glove Rock. It's in England. I hiked to it. Do you see how it kind of looks like a boxing glove there? See that there? Anyway. So we are guardians of identity. So what the world needs as we work with ambient computing, as we're guardians of identity, is the idea of, first of all, emerging tech. We asked companies, small companies and large companies, we asked them, what will drive business? What will drive growth moving forward? You know, with COVID, coping with that, but in general. And what we found mostly is that these trends that we have been seeing, that emerging tech is making it possible to grow business, that didn't necessarily change and it's a whole new world with COVID. It just sped things up. Do you know what I'm trying to say? COVID simply made people realize and speed things up and kind of realize, well, this tech has been around a while, so we're going to move along. So we need to move quicker. There's a question Trevor is asking on the chat here. Is there a CompTIA exam that assesses zero trust competency? Zero trust is finding its way into Network Plus. It is in Security Plus. It's also in CASP Plus. So yes, it's working its way. We are not creating a Zero Trust Plus certification, but it's working its way into all of the areas because zero trust is not just one piece of software that you put in. It's a series of about at least 5 or 6 different technologies. Happy to come back and talk about zero trust in more detail if you wanna. So yes, it is working its way into our certifications. So the idea, folks, is that if about half of the companies use IoT and artificial intelligence and software as a service, the cloud, to grow, then we need workers who understand that. So we asked, well, tell us more about the technologies that really rise to the top, that are really important. And this slide, what I want you to get at is, for the first time, we saw artificial intelligence rise to the very tippy top. And the reason it has is because we are basically taking all this information that's generated and we don't just store it and we don't just do manual analysis of it. We do a lot of that, but we need artificial intelligence to help do the pattern recognition, to help sift through information. So we need workers who can implement that. Internet of Things is very important because that's where we get our data from, et cetera. 5G, that's how we manage all of those IoT devices and how we manage the cloud, all that cloud computing data, because the old way of doing networking, the traditional way of doing it, isn't capable of handling all these new devices. So these are the technologies that have kind of risen to the top. We asked business leaders, what are the reasons why it takes longer for you to get a good sales cycle going? You know, idea, conception, execution, and then actually making money on it, okay? And the big top answer was, well, you know, there's a lot of technology we have to mess with. We have to decide whether something goes into the cloud now, or does it go into the server room, which is, you know, local, you know, behind me here. Which is local to, you know, where you are sitting, you know, or does it go into a data center down the road? You have to make decisions. Security is an issue. There's regulatory and compliance considerations. So those are the main things that are kind of slowing down adoption of emerging technology. And by the way, this emerging technology is not stuff that's going to be here in 3 to 5 years. It's here now, ready to be used. So what we did is we asked IT professionals, you know, what are the top skills that you need to have? And they said, well, cloud computing's number one. Why? Not because it's new and fancy, but that's where you get your emerging technologies. Instead of saying, well, okay, we want to use artificial intelligence, well, we better get a hold of that. MIT worker, or we better get a hold of that person to create that code. Nah, we don't want to do that. We just need to go to our cloud services and source it there. So networking is very important. Storage is very important. Server administration. But I want to focus on cloud for a second, because when it comes to the essential skills that we're looking at here, the cloud is impacting every job role. Let's talk about tech support, for example. Now, we all know those typical help desk, service desk, field service jobs and things like that. But increasingly, when it comes to technical skills, we're realizing that cloud and security is really very much where IT workers need to learn when they're technical support folks. We also realizing that troubleshooting and diagnosing myriad issues, lots of issues, is very important. In other words, that today's technical support worker is not just somebody who looks at a ticket and then, okay, I know a simple thing. I can just read the solution. If you read the solution off the internet or off the ticket software or whatever, that's only about 1/10 of the information that you need to have. So we still have a lot of IT workers that really need to understand, you know, strong troubleshooting. Any questions? All right. we realized that there are still need for data center workers. Now, data center is not the cloud, right? Cloud is basically something you go to Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, IBM. But when it comes to data centers, we realize that there are still a lot of applications that need to be put in that data center that's down the road a ways. Lots of troubleshooting knowledge. I'll give you a quick story. There was a gentleman who was talking with Microsoft, not Anthony here, but another person, who was saying, James, the biggest problem that we have is in the data center is we'll see a support ticket come up that says, um, it looks like this computer hard disk is having a problem, in this server. Okay. So what happened was 3 times they had workers go up to the server and replace the hard disk, right? But it didn't solve the actual problem. The problem wasn't with the hard disk. It looked like it was, but it wasn't. And it took somebody who happened, and that person went up there and realized, well, the problem wasn't with the hard disk. The problem was with the software, the hard disk controller, and solved that problem. Now, so there was a difference between 4 workers. 3 of them just kind of read the ticket and replaced the hard drive 3 times. So imagine the time and money wasted there, when the real problem, there was an underlying issue. We need workers who understand how to do troubleshooting. That means they need to have proper foundational knowledge. When it comes to the cloud, that's different than a data center. Here are the typical job roles that we're seeing: architects who can create cloud solutions, engineers who can actually enable them, technicians who are at the tactical level. But the cloud is really cool because it could represent a data lake, for example. That's a picture of a lake I took while I was walking on something called Striding Edge in the UK. A data lake is basically where you capture all that information that's generated as Stephen or Mark or anybody is walking down the road. And then it enables people to study that and do analysis of that data lake. So that's what the cloud can provide. It provides so many of these services. But the problem is there are a lot of perils involved. This here is as I was walking up Striding Edge. On one side of Striding Edge, as I was walking here, it's a mountain in England. If I wandered too far off one direction, I think that was about a 300 or 400 foot fall. On the other side, I think it was about a 600-foot fall, and it was about 3 feet across, 2 or 3 feet across. I had to walk across that. It was a lot of fun. The cloud is similar. Okay, you have a certain path that you can go on, regardless of your vendor, the vendor that you use, but it can represent opportunity to quickly implement emerging technologies, or it can represent kind of something that is very dangerous, and you can kind of fall into something. This here is the AWS management console. Here's where I have sourced here. I'm creating an Ubuntu Linux server. But what I realized right away was that as I was implementing my particular cloud solution that I was making, I found that actually I wasn't using multi-factor authentication. And I did a little audit, and I was able to go and find how I needed to activate multi-factor authentication. The reason I'm drilling down into the cloud here is because we need workers who understand not only how to create these solutions, but how to secure them.
James, if I could interrupt for just a moment. You said this a couple times now. You said the foundational skills are important, and I don't know when or where, or if you're going to address this or not in your presentation. We have a lot of people that seem to think you can just leapfrog right into, well, yesterday I was studying graphic arts. I think I'm going to take a course in cloud, become a cloud technician. What would your advice be to people who think that?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'll jump to that really quick. When it comes to foundations, what we find is people will go, well, I guess I don't need to worry about all of those, all of that technical details about computers, because if I just go to the cloud and I learn, let me go back on my little, just to be dramatic, all I have to do is just click on a few things on a web browser, right? I open up my web browser, go up, in this case, to AWS, and I can launch a fully provisioned server in about, I don't know, 40 minutes. Right? So I don't need to understand really how those servers work, because it's just a menu item now. That sounds great, but that's not the reality. Because once that server is up and running, once whatever solution is that's up and running, you still need to know the essentials. And here's some of the essentials. Do you really understand IP addressing, MAC addresses? Let's start with the endpoints. When I say endpoints, I'm talking about servers, workstations. Do you really understand how they communicate and network? Trust me, when you launch that Ubuntu server, you're still going to have to understand how to partition. You're going to have to understand how to bring up services and end services. You're going to have to understand all those things. So the foundational stuff, the fundamentals apply. Do you still, trust me, I know cloud workers every day. I say, well, what are those fancy new cloud troubleshooting tools that you use? And they'll say ping, ARP, netstat. I mean, those kinds of essentials is what I'm talking about. Because if you don't have those, as soon as something starts to glitch, you're going to be completely nonplussed. So I'm not saying that a person who does development, as you were saying, front-end development, can't become a cloud worker. Yes, they can. But frankly, they still have to have their endpoints in place, knowledge in place. That means A+ level. If you want to talk in CompTIA terms, A+, is all about endpoints, from IoT devices to notebook computers to servers, etc. Is that, Stephen, does that answer your question?
Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. There is, yeah, there's still a server and a network, as Terry here is putting it up there. And Richard is saying, how to secure it as well is very important. Cloud providers, Richard's asking, cloud providers don't seem to play too well together. Can CompTIA help with that? It's interesting from an advocacy perspective. What we do is we basically have really pushed the idea, not only in our research, but also as we talk with cloud providers to make it possible for migrations to occur. They'll say, well, James, back on you, teach people how to do migrations, migrations from a data center, physical, right, to virtual, P2V, right, to cloud, right, or from V to V, from cloud to cloud. And so there's a slide here, Terry. I think I anticipated this question a little bit, because people don't like the idea of vendor lock-in. Okay, if we go with AWS, data has its own gravity, or information has a certain gravity. Once it gets stuck in there, it's hard for me to get it out. More and more, you're seeing cloud providers saying, I realize that most people want a multi-cloud solution, not only to manage cost, but basically to say if they are if they encounter attacks or something like that, you have multiple providers that can help. The other thing with hybrid cloud that's very important to understand is all of these providers have their own little DNA. When I say little, I don't mean it that way, but let's put it this way. AWS started because, remember, Amazon sold books back in the day, remember? And then they sold stuff, right? Well, the reason why AWS became so big is they really focused on that kind of commerce side of things. So they have a great DNA in that area. Azure has its DNA in a small, medium business world. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. They're just different solutions. Google, their DNA in many ways is through search and scalability. So you need to say, well, we're going to use our solutions in various clouds for various reasons. And we need workers who can make those kinds of decisions. The top 3 challenges for the cloud, in fact, are they don't know foundational knowledge. I already talked about that. Security, as we talked about that before, but managing cloud spend. They'll use the term right sizing. Techies like to talk about it in terms of, well, do we have the right storage size, or the right networking, the right solutions involved? But right sizing also involves cost. You can't just set it and forget it in the cloud. Trust me, that'll come back and bite you really, really hard. So the fundamentals for any gig, and I've already hit this, so I'll go very quickly over this slide. Endpoints, networking, authentication, databases, and search. Those are 3 or 4 areas that are really important. And it kind of comes down, if you remember, what's that show, The Music Man, the old, what is that, 50s show, or maybe it was early 60s, where they're saying, you got to know the territory. Well, you do. You have to know the territory. Let me stop here. There's a question from Trevor. Hey, Dr. Stanger, just call me James. I got my doctorate in English literature. Okay, so anyway, emerging technologies comprises a variety of tech, right? Does CompTIA have any exams right now that focuses on the assessment of skills and knowledge of these technologies? We find that basically one of the first things that I would do if I was assessing my workers or even students, I would start with them with IT fundamentals, believe it or not, ITF plus. The reason being, it hits all those 4 pillars that I was talking about. Security, infrastructure, development, right, data. And it does a really good job with that. When it comes to other emerging technologies, you'll find them working its way into various certifications. From an automation perspective, automation is so important. I use that fancy word disintermediation, right? Automation makes it possible to eliminate, right, repetitive tasks, or anything that is in the middle that can be in one way or the other automated or bypassed. I think a lot of people feel IT jobs are going to be automated. You know, I think everybody worries about all of their jobs being automated. And that's obvious. It does happen. It is happening. But having said that, each time we use automation, it just seems that there's a different, it kind of moves the knowledge level up a little bit. So today's workers from help desk, think of what they needed to know 20 years ago. Well, you know, how to stick in a hard disk and all that stuff. They don't need to know that as much. Now it's all about information transfer and how to make sure that as you get a new device, how does all that information on one device transfer over to the other? But talking about automation, we need people who understand things like Ansible and Docker and Kubernetes, how to work all of those solutions. Won't go into the details of that, but Docker has to do with creating all sorts of really cool instances. And what they realize, instances of a solution. So serverless computing, like, okay, James, we want a web server, but we don't want to spin up a whole Linux system. We just need the server part. So they're able to create these containers. But after a while, if you create 1,000 containers, well, who's going to manage them? And what do these containers do? And more importantly, when do they do it? That's why you need things like Kubernetes to basically orchestrate all of those different instances. So automation involves all of what I've just been talking about, and also artificial intelligence. I see all of those working together that way. And Terry, you got a great point. You need process geeks like idle, you know, ITIL, that kind of thing, who understand business processes, but also project management, very important. Data and search and business intelligence has become a critical skill area. A lot of the database administration folks that I knew, I've known for 20 years, most of them have moved into the predictive analytics and data visualization field. I'm not saying database administration is unimportant. It's vitally important. We need DBAs, but I just want to make it aware though, that we're seeing people move from database administration into the idea of business intelligence, what it means to do data management. Blockchain can be a part of that, but the main thing I want to point out here is the idea of managing information is very important. Linux continues to be an essential skill. It's the tool of choice for simply everything. I do a lot of security auditing and security analytics. I spend most of my time, by most of my time, 80% in a Linux system doing that. Okay, just an idea. From a mobile development perspective, is very important. Also see network management as being a very important thing. We need people who understand software-defined networking. That's a fancy term for basically saying, instead of doing traditional network management where we go and administer a router and do a router over another router or a firewall, with software-defined networking, you log into one central resource that then has the opportunity, the ability to manage thousands or hundreds or dozens of individual edge devices. Because as information, this little graphic that you're seeing here, as information goes from IoT devices like drops of rain into edge nodes, into data lakes, and flows into the cloud or data centers, we need workers who can understand how to manage that information. And it's a very different way of managing things in software-defined networking, different planes, three different planes of network management. So we need people to understand network segmentation and how to prioritize traffic, not just creating a load balancer and things like that, but understanding how information goes from one to the next. Very important concept there. Richard, you pointed out the cloud is Linux. Yes, absolutely. You can, of course, source, you can create Windows servers in the cloud, and a lot of small, medium businesses will always do that. And that's great. But if you want to take a look at what's running, whether it be the web servers or running all the cloud solutions, it's mostly Linux systems, let's face it. Network management being very important. We need good splunkers, okay? Not just the application called Splunk, but people who can do troubleshooting. That's a couple of members of my family. We were down in a cave in the Lava Beds National Monument there in Northern California. We need people who can go in and troubleshoot networks and shed light on problems in networks, kind of like how we shed light as we were going into these caves here. All right, cybersecurity professional. Let me see. And thanks for all your comments here. I want you guys to understand when it comes to security, one thing, if you remember only one thing about security out of this webinar, and it's this. Notice we asked people, what are the most important things that security people are providing? And you can see at the bottom there, zero trust came up, right? And that's important. But look at what came up top as an important skill, security monitoring. And if you look at the next one, that was just almost equally important, 46% as opposed to 58%. It said incident detection and response. Those are really kind of the same thing in many ways because it has to do with visualization. Okay. The reason I bring this up is that visualization is very important. I think we've all heard about the supply chain attack with solar winds and all that sort of thing. Solar winds happen for many reasons, but one of them is because we were not properly monitoring. So imagine if Stephen and I are working in a government for a government agency, the Department of Defense agency, let's say the Air Force, just pick them out of the blue. We need people, the two of us would make sure that we are doing good packet captures, that we are viewing our data feeds. And let's put it this way, when we get an update, whether it be from Microsoft or from SolarWinds or from wherever, you have to trust it, but you have to verify. We need monitoring. What happens is, and I'm picking on the government, but small, medium businesses do this all day long. They just assume, well, it's an update coming. It's cryptographically signed. It's there. I mean, it seems safe. So let's just accept it into our network. You can't do that anymore. You have to verify and analyze any data stream coming in, whether it be an IoT device, a server update, or whatever. You need enhanced monitoring. And so we need to understand how to visualize attacks and identify threat actors. Let me make this a little interactive here. Take a look at this picture. Can you see it? Resize the picture if you can. To see it. I took this picture when I was in Grand Teton National Park here about 2.5 years ago. Do you see a threat actor here in any way? So notice there's a dead tree that's standing up, kind of a snag, almost a snag. See, now just look to the side of that in the center of the picture. Do you see a threat actor? What do you see? Type it in to the chat window. And don't worry, I have a point for this. Do you see any sort of threat actor there? So type it into the chat window what you see there, because this has to do with what cybersecurity professionals are doing every day. Yes, Terry, there is some kind of animal there. And in the interest of time, I'll move on. So that animal is right in the middle there. Ooh, there we go. That's a grizzly bear. Okay. So we saw that grizzly bear. And of course, my kids were like, hey, Dad, let's, get away from it. I kept running towards it. And finally, my kids kind of pulled me aside and said, Dad, maybe you don't want to run towards the grizzly bear. But that is a threat actor. And what was it doing? Well, it was eating a distressed resource. It was eating the bugs off of this dead tree, right? They eat bugs. They eat everything. My point being that we need IT workers, security workers who can look for threat actors and anomalies. We also need IT workers that can look at patterns. And good point, Terry. The dead tree could cause damage in and of itself because, and this is kind of my point, if the dead tree's there, that's a distressed asset, a distressed server, a hacker's going to come in and take advantage of it. We also need people who can identify patterns. In the interest of time, I won't make you go through this here, but these are a few mountains. You can type in the chat window. I took this a few weeks ago as I was lucky enough to travel to North Carolina to shoot some videos about cybersecurity. And I was lucky enough there were no clouds in the sky here up in Seattle, Washington area, which is unusual for us, right? It usually rains a lot. But you can see that first mountain there is Mount Rainier. Can you see that, the big one there? But look at all those mountains behind it, right? There's another one there behind it. Anybody name any of those mountains? So there's Rainier, and you've got to know any other ones. Okay. Oh, Trevor, you already saw this. Sorry. There we go. Yes, Mount Hood is the very furthest one, kind of near the center to the left, right? So there's Rainier, there's Hood, also Mount Adams, right? And then Mount St. Helens. Thank you very much, Richard. Mount St. Helens. What you're looking at is a pattern that Pacific Northwesterners will call rash. It's not every day that you can see rash in the state of Washington. Rainier, Adams, St. Helens, and Hood, rash. Okay. My point is that we need people who do pattern recognition. I was talking to a person who works with distributed denial of service attacks every day. He makes sure that small businesses and large businesses don't fall victim to DDoS attacks. And I said, well, what's the killer skill? Is it a piece of software? What is it? And he said, James, we need people who can identify patterns He said artificial intelligence gets us so far. There are tools that help you, but we need people who monitor security on a daily basis and can identify patterns. So you're looking here at an eye chart of a, of a graphic here. This is a graphic meant to show how a security operations center works, how it takes data in and information in from so many different resources. That can be artificial intelligence. It can be from fellow security analysts, from cloud solutions, from SIMs and things like that, and then basically makes decisions. We need workers who can do that. We also need workers who can do governance. And that means, back in the day, it was kind of like the IT department worker did everything. She provided the service and then secured the service. But by 2015, a lot of companies had realized, some companies don't do this and they succeed, but most companies they distinguish between the person who provides the infrastructure service and the person who provides the security service. So we need workers who can understand the difference there. Sorry, I'm having a hard time here. There we go. But we also need workers who can do the governance. That's by 2020, we realized there's a cybersecurity management piece, there's a cybersecurity doing piece, and then there's the infrastructure piece. We need people who can do compliance. And some of those people aren't very technical. I was talking in the UK to a person, this is just a couple of months ago, a month and a half ago, who was an ex-policeman. He was Bobby. And he moved from being a Bobby into being a compliance expert. He goes, look, I'm not particularly technical, James. He really was, actually. But he says, as a Bobby, I was very good at looking at the surface of a thing and then kind of delving deeper into it to see what's really going on. A couple of points to make from that. One, we need people who have previous life history and life experience, and we need people who are not only technical, okay? So we need power skills, and you can call them power skills, you can call them employment skills, etc. But we need the T-shaped individual, somebody who understands broad skills and deep skills, okay? All along those lines. So we need workers from all backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds, from cognitive diversity to racial diversity, gender diversity. But we need people who can understand how to work with other people closely. So we need workers that can handle the complex projects, mapping technical to business, to do governance, GRC, governance, who could do data analytics and monitoring, right? And we have career pathways at CompTIA. I won't go into this too much, but we basically have an infrastructure pathway. We have a cybersecurity pathway. We can start people from the beginning to the end. I think you get the idea, but we have project management, cloud, etc. But what I wanted to get into is some lifelong learning things in the last at least 10 minutes here for instructor resources, because I've gone through a whole array of all these skills. So how do you teach this stuff? Well, at CompTIA, we've thought very carefully about it. And first of all, there's the CompTIA Instructor Network. Thousands of instructors. It's a collaborative environment. If you're not a member already, join on in. Join on in. You can apply. There's the URL. Very cool thing. One of the examples that we did is that back when COVID, everybody was kind of, caught off center, of course, with COVID. So what we did is we put together a series of, this is just a small example of what we do at the CompTIA Instructor Network. It's a free resource, by the way. But we basically said, look, if you've been thrust into teaching online, here are some really cool ways on a budget, this kind of budget, zero, that you can do to teach your students online, and with hands-on labs and things like that. And that was a lot of fun to do. We also have additional complementary resources. There's office hours with James. I could give you URLs for that. You can Google that. We do CompTIA YouTube live sessions from various things in regards to diversity, for example, into specific tasks about what it means to be a help desk worker, etc. That can be very good for instructors to supplement their learning. We do also dedicated learning events. I've done them boot camps, some of them days long, some of them hours long, some of them minutes long, some of them even weeks long learning events. We also do face-to-face sessions when all that starts back up again. So I would really recommend not only these things, but our industry leading research. You can Google for it. You can go to CompTIA.org and learn about all these things. Additional lifelong learning resources that you can check out include CertMaster Learn, CertMaster Practice, CertMaster Labs. Okay, 3 different things, 3 different tools. Let's talk about CertMaster Learn. CertMaster Learn is an interactive environment. It's very cool in that it's basically, as you have it replaces a book, it's online learning. That's what it's designed to do. but also CertMaster Practice is the practice exam. Okay, so CertMaster Learn's where you actually learn it, and it has tons of questions. It has fantastic courseware in it, but CertMaster Practice are the practice exams. Okay, so you can actually, practice. If you're anything like me, I'm full of testing anxiety. I've got all sorts of certifications, but I don't test well. At least I don't feel I test well. It's tough for me. This is a helpful environment. And what's really cool about CertMaster Practice that I like about it is it not only asks you, hey, A, B, C, or D, which one is it? But it will then ask you, how confident are you? You just chose something. You chose C. Were you really confident in that, or were you not so confident? What's really nice about this, I wish I had this years ago, because I've often been strong and wrong in in some of my ideas about certain things, permissions or whatever. If I had the ability for a testing tool to say, hey, actually, James, you were strong and incorrect, so now you need to kind of change your mind. I've not seen many learning tools that have the ability to evaluate your clarity this way. Not just, learning the knowledge stuff, but how you learn the knowledge. I find that very interesting, very important. We have CertMaster Labs. So in my opinion, we learn by doing. I can't emphasize enough the hands-on nature, how important all of this is. I would much rather, go into a learning environment, a live learning environment, and then, mess it up and then restart it, et cetera, rather than just read about it. That's just me, right? So that's very important from CertMaster Labs. So when I find, let's go into CertMaster Learn for a second. There are about 5 different areas, and I won't belabor it because in the interest of time, we have about 10 minutes left. But what's really cool is it does help students learn, and it kind of helps them, holds them accountable. And there's a reason for this, because we focus on an instructor-led way of doing this. And in other words, there are reports that you can generate. And these reports that you can generate are very helpful for all of your students, and it's centralized. And it's really cool because it helps you manage how they go about and to evaluate how they're learning. So we have lessons, we have videos, we have flashcards, and performance-based questions. And that's not CertMaster Practice. That's different. The questions are actually found in CertMaster Learn as well. So we have pretty good instructional design. When I say pretty good, I mean really good. We have a good understanding of what the average, from an 8th grade reading level perspective, how long it will take them to learn that. We have learning plans where you can set times in advance. You can say, look, how long do you feel it will take you to learn this? Set a time. And that way students can basically, and instructors can agree upon how long it will take to learn this. There are practice questions and all sorts of performance-based questions. There's student group and institutional reporting. And I want to hit that really hard. So the idea is that it's not just that they go and learn and then you have to go through and find some sort of way to evaluate what your student's done. In this case, there are pretty good logs, very good informational resources that will allow your instructors to identify exactly how students have learned. You get a completion certificate from the course. That's the case. And we have learning dashboards that you as an instructor or you as or the student can basically say how they've progressed. Pretty helpful. And then again, our hands-on practice labs. Very cool, because I just usually when I'm learning, I'll download a virtual machine and launch it, and then I mess it up, and then I have to recreate the machine. This is so nice with these labs, because if you mess things up, it's so easy to reset reset things, and you don't have to deal with, oh gosh, I made a bad decision 3 days ago and things won't work properly. You can just kind of wipe it out and start over, or go back to a certain spot and start over. It's very nice. We also make it possible for organizations to manage their students much more easily, and very good instructor resources from PowerPoint slides and things like that. And of course, you can get things in the CompTIA Instructor Network. We also have very good integration with learning management systems, LTI compliance and all of that. I stop there. Can an institution become a CompTIA certified facility? Yes, they can become a CompTIA partner. Absolutely. I can put you in touch with the right people to get that done. Briju, no problem at all. Forgive me if I didn't say your name correctly. But yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
So let's move. You bet. And did you have any other questions about that specifically?
No, just to get started, because we are offering curriculum, but we just want to make sure if there is something that we can actually be a partner.
Yeah, fantastic. Where are you calling in from, by the way?
Merced College, actually. Merced.
Yeah, in Merced, I like that area. You know, so yeah, we could definitely work with you on that, and you'll find that not only and you don't have to become a CompTIA certified to work as a partner to join the CompTIA Instructor Network, for example, if you don't want to, but to become a partner will help you in a lot of ways with discounts and things like that. So you can contact me, folks, and I'll give you my email just real quick: jstanger@comptia.org. That's a great way to get a hold of me if you want to do it that way. So thank you for asking. Other questions, folks?
I have a general question, James. I mean, first off, thank you. This is enormous, and you flew through it, and you got it all. I mean, it's just like high-fiving you right now.
Well, I hope it made sense, everybody.
It was perfect, and of course they can always watch it again.
Sure.
I was wondering though, as we're talking about COVID and everybody being remote now and everything, and what's the job market like? Have you perceived any difference in what needs to be trained or how people are getting hired in this COVID influenced environment?
Yeah, the first thing that we're finding, and fairly obviously, is ways to support remote users, right? And so a lot of that you're going to see with COVID. We're already, we always revise A+. It's always morphing, but a major morphing and changes coming up in the next, in the next year, and so remote support is going to be very important. What we're also seeing with COVID is how do you go about if everybody's now so remote, right? How do you go about making sure that as Stephen logs in, as you log in, Stephen, to a cloud resource or whatever, how do you know whether that's all legitimate? At what point, does that legitimate connection, what does that look like? Because back in the day, it was like, well, okay, there's a DHCP server happening, and here's the login to the Active Directory. That's all changed now with all these cloud connections that are made, IoT. How do you reassemble all that so that as Stephen logs in, how do you visualize that so that it's coherent, so that it makes any sort of sense? And now that everybody's hyper distributed. So that's the second thing. Zero trust becomes very important. And zero trust is a fancy way of basically saying we no longer really believe in that firewall, inside the firewall, outside the firewall distinction. That's not as useful now as it was for so many reasons. People are working at home. The cloud is always outside the firewall, isn't it, in a sense? So there are so many different technologies. So zero trust is another thing that has been around for years. People have been talking about it, but that's rapidly becoming a very important skill. And like I mentioned, there's about 5 different technologies there. One of them, log analysis. One of them, user behavior analytics, right? Another one, basically doing cross-site, cross-network analysis. And this basically, with zero trust, my favorite analogy to this is about zombie movies. You guys ever seen a good zombie movie, right? How do you know when that good guy, right, your partner, right, the person you trust, at what point do you identify, oh my gosh, that person's turned into a zombie, right? Isn't that about 90% of their stress and the fun that happens in zombie movies, right? It's been that way in IT forever. Well, that's James's notebook computer. It's trusted. It's okay. Somehow it got turned into a zombie or a botnet, or it got, in what way did it no longer become trusted? And skills that help you understand that, to identify strange behavior quickly and respond properly to it, right? Those are increasingly important skills. All right, I'll stop there.
Do you anticipate?
Yeah, I would reiterate also, Steve, that this was such a spot on presentation. I would love to be able to capture it in ways for different audiences that I work in. I'm a retired IT manager. I managed a service desk for 18 years. And I often say a lot of the things that you're saying here today that, I hear sometimes like, well, we don't need to teach networking anymore. I'm like, no, you still need to teach networking, because you have to be able to understand, when you're on the help desk, it actually has gotten more difficult to work on the help desk because you don't know what you kind of peel the onion. You don't know which service it is. They call up and they say, like, I can't do this thing, but, the help desk doesn't have any visibility into that thing. So those troubleshooting skills, those pattern matching skills, all of that stuff you're saying today just it obviously got me excited.
I think it was a really good point about peeling back the onion. We asked people at the help desk, for example, in a recent survey, what are the important skills? And interestingly enough, they said, many things, but one of the things that really came out, cloud, understanding how those things work. It's not just logging into the domain controller or whatever and resetting a password. It's working with the access manager of a cloud provider. That's one. And then networking came up as a really important skill for help desk, which I find interesting.
All right.
And by the way, one thing, I remember when I first started working for CompTIA, I was kind of like, well, do we really need help desk workers anymore? And the answer is there are more help desk workers and more empty help desk jobs out there than ever before, because we moved from break fix 15 years ago. You know what I mean by break fix? Like the PC broke and stick in a new hard drive. That still happens, but that's only a small percentage of what a help desk worker does now. So.
And most
for sure.
help desk jobs can be achieved with like a A+ and S+ type, maybe an N+ type certification.
You bet. It's funny, and you could say, well, of course, James works for CompTIA. He's going to say the big three, A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, but it applies all the more. And I have seen people try to say, well, I want to stampede into security. Heck with all that other stuff. It's like, well, if you don't know how the endpoints work, and if you don't know how they network, you ain't going to be able to secure them. You just
Right.
can't.
All right. Well, it's getting to time. A lot of people here are going to have to sign off.
Sorry. Yeah.
The commitments. And James, I can't thank you enough. What a brilliant presentation. I'm so glad we record and transcript these things so we can share it. This is the right thing at the right time for us. And everybody here, thank you for joining us. Hope to see you next Friday. And James, you could be in our audience in the future, and we're going to have some pretty interesting.
I think I might join in. It'd be fun. I'll be nice and quiet next time. So.
All right, thank you. No, you're always welcome to chat. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good week.
Take care, everyone. All the best.